Today we're going to be covering the drywall ceiling condition properties. We're going to focus on the general and the stud and trim tab in this video. Now, starting up here on the top, you're going to have the description of your condition, so go ahead and fill that name out to be whatever you would like to see there. Moving to the right, you have your ceiling height. Ceiling height is going to come into play for descriptors when you're looking at your labor screen. And continuing down, you do have your C fields as you have in all of your other conditions, and these are just your user definable fields. Continuing down below that, you're going to have your board. So you do have a layer 1 and a layer 2 field here for your board. So ultimately, starting from the top, number of layers. So how many layers of that board are you going to be putting on? What's the thickness that you're going to be using for that board? Next, you have your width and your length. What width and length of board are you going to be ordering for this project? And then finally, you have the type. So what type of board are you going to be working with? Next question we're going to ask you is, are you finishing this or are you going to fire tape this board? Now ultimately that's going to depend on if you're using two different styles of board. We do have a layer 2 option here for if you were going to be doing, say, two different thicknesses of board or just two different types altogether. So ultimately just turn layer 2 on and fill it out as needed. If you don't need finishing or fire taping, just simply uncheck the box and then you won't have to worry about it being populated. Now, I am going to cover the furring portion of this as well with you. Reason being is because we use the furring portion when you look at a suspended ceiling condition. So I want you to know how to fill this information out and how it's going to be utilized. Underneath the furring, when you turn it on, you'll have deck centers. Now, this is if you're using this for a suspended ceiling, these are going to be your wire drops. So keep this in mind here. Think of this as essentially like the main beams that you're going to be running. Okay. Now you have a tied to, you do have channel or furring. Now whatever you choose here depends on which column you're going to be filling out the information and which column we're going to be pulling data from for you. So if you were to look at a suspended ceiling condition, ultimately you'll see that that is going to be based off of channels, and we're saying that our centers are at 6 feet, and ultimately we're going to be running our wire drops every 48 inches. Okay, so this is how you can kind of see the suspended version versus the stud frame ceiling that we were just looking at. But ultimately, the furring field is where you're going to calculate those wires. So starting up at the top, we're going to ask you what your wire gauge is going to be. We're going to ask you what the wire length is going to be. If you're going to cut that to a different size, go ahead and change the cut to. Your centers are ultimately how often are you going to be dropping this wire. Right now, you don't need depth when you're working with channels because you don't have a depth. The width, in this case, this is going to be referring to the CRC that you're working with. So here you have a 1/2 inch width CRC, comes in 16-foot pieces. The type is CRC, and the gauge, again, just 16 gauge. If you were going to be utilizing the furring, you would want to click the drop down, choose furring as an option, and then go through all those same fields. Again, nothing changes. It's just a matter of which field are you going to be using when you're working with the suspended drywall ceiling in the drywall ceiling condition. So that's how you're going to fill out the general portion of your drywall ceiling condition. Now let's take a look at the stud and trim, the next tab available. So moving down to your stud and trim tab, the first column you have are your studs. Starting at the top, what are the centers? In this case, we're saying 24 inches. Continuing down, what's the gauge of stud that you're going to be using? The gauge of metal for that stud. What's the width that you're going to be using for the stud? And again, what is the length and the cut from length? For the cut from, if you're going to be ordering a 20 foot and cutting them down to 10, well then you would just simply need to change your cut from to 20 feet and that would set you up. Final option you have is your type. Typically the type is going to be the SSMA code or some type of nomenclature or the flange width. Moving to the right you have your track. So here you're producing the gauge of track, the width of track, the length of track, and if you wanted to have your type you could also choose type. If you want to have track equal the perimeter, so equal the perimeter of your takeoff, simply click this checkbox and we'll automatically calculate track around the perimeter of the area you draw. The next option you have is trim. In this case, you see that we don't have it turned on. However, if we wanted to, we could turn on trim. Simply type in the number of runs of trim that you would like to produce. What is the board thickness that you're using? What is the length of trim that you're going to be ordering? What's the specific material for the trim you're using? What is this trim going to be used as? In this case, corner bead. And following, the final option you have is square foot of mud per lineal foot. In this case, if you wanted to produce 2 square foot per every one, simply type in 2 here, and for every 1 lineal foot you measure, we'll produce 1 square foot on the left and on the right side of that piece of trim. Now that's all we're going to cover in today's video. However, if you would like to see the installation, the count, and the miscellaneous tabs, please refer to the other video that we have out there on the drywall ceiling condition properties. If you do have any additional questions or you run into any issues as you're filling this information out, please feel free to reach out to our tech team and they'd be happy to assist you and pointing you in the right direction. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day.